to be able to have, and frankly, as humanity to be able to have. When we think of joy, I want us to just kind of have this in our minds for a sec. What comes to mind when you think of it? I want us to take maybe a few moments just of silence to maybe think of what comes to mind when we think of joy. So if you would just take maybe just a few quick moments and just maybe try think of what joy might mean or what comes to mind. Everything. Joy is a wonderful, wonderful thing. A lot of times when we think of joy, we might think of happiness. Looking up there and hoping that's a little bit big. If it's a little small, I'm sorry. I didn't know how big everything would be, so I tried to scale it up. When we think of joy, one thing that might come to mind is happiness. And sure, happiness absolutely a lot of times is a part of it. Happiness is a wonderful thing with it. And this might be the first thing you thought of. Maybe you thought of joy and the first thought, yeah, happiness. A lot of times we have this, and a lot of times it's kind of treated as a synonym for joy. Surely happiness is a part of it. I'm not going to say it's a one-to-one ratio for joy, but absolutely, if we want to consider joy, we have to think about what it means to be happy as well. Not the same, yet they are connected. Something else might be attitude when we think of joy. We might think about how we carry ourselves or how other people carry themselves. It might be a sort of satisfaction as we walk in our lives, or it might be a kind of optimism. It may manifest itself in one of those two things or in any other attitude we may think of. When we think of joy, we might think of a certain attitude someone has that shows that they are a joyful person. We might also think of holidays. Holidays are a very big time for joy, and frankly, if we want to think about joy, it's very likely we're going to think about it during the Christmas season. During Christmas, we will have ornaments that might say joy on them. We might see signs as we walk through a store. We might see that sign that says joy just in the really pretty cursive or just fancy letters. And we even have songs that explicitly mention joy. Joy is a very common thing during the holidays, and if we think about joy, it might come to our mind. It's easy to have joy during the holidays. It is easily the most common time of year for us to think about it. So when we think about joy, we might think about those things. You might have thought about other things, and those are probably good as well. But what about joy in people? When we consider joy with people, there's a lot of things that we have to consider. It's not always easy to have joy. Now, we might know people who are joyful in who they are. Maybe you know someone, and I'm sure there's people here who have a joy-filled life, who can maybe, to those around them, very clearly demonstrate that they have a joy to them. Maybe they're happy a lot more. Maybe they have that attitude about them. And not just in the holiday season, maybe it's all the time that you can tell that person has so much joy, but it's not easy for everyone to have that joy. Joy isn't necessarily easy to come by. Sometimes life just makes it so that joy can't be easily obtained. During the announcements and as I was kind of reading through the bulletin, I noticed quite a few amazing things. In the announcement, specifically, I heard that last Sunday, 2 new brothers were added to the Lord's church. And when I heard that, I was so happy. I still am about that. And I may not know them personally. If they're here, I'm happy for you. I'm happy for the choice that you've made. In a sense, I'll say I have a certain joy right now that I was able to look at the bulletin, that I was able to hear the words that we have 2 people added to the Lord's church. It's cause for joy. It's a wonderful time. It's a great thing, something that should cause us all to have this joy because 2 more people were saved. We have 2 new people who we can call family. It's a good time. It's easy to have joy then. But then I also heard that, of course, there's people who are sick, people who've had tragedies happen. I can't fully remember the name right now, but I read in the bulletin that someone had recently lost a cousin, I believe it was. And that's just an awful time. One moment you have two baptisms, the next moment, further on in that bulletin list, you see someone's passed away. And it's so hard when you're in those times of life to have joy. You can't have joy in that one moment, but then the next moment, all of a sudden, who knows what's going to come down the road. It's not always easy to have joy. Some find it easier than others do, but nonetheless, not every moment of life will be easy for us to find that in. And so we ask ourselves the question, how can I have joy when blank is happening in my life? Surely in those good times, it's easier. Surely when someone's baptized, it's easier. Surely when you feel like your faith is strong, it's easier. Surely when your job is going well, your family is doing well, or when the church is doing well, it's easy to have that. But when all those things are flipped around, how can I have joy when this awful thing with my job is happening? How can I have joy when I lost my job? How can I have joy when I had a bad day at work? How can I have joy when I find it hard to be around certain people? How can I have joy when I feel like my faith isn't strong enough? How can I have joy when things aren't going the way I want them to go? The world and Christians alike can experience lack of joy sometimes. We mentioned it's easier to have that joy in holiday seasons, but outside that holiday season, how often do we really find ourselves being a joyful person? We can sometimes experience a large lack of joy. And so the question I want us to ask today, how do we have joy when life makes it hard to hold on to? The idea of the sermon is holding on to joy. And of course, when you have this question, that kind of brings this all together. How do we hold on to joy? How do we find it? How do we hold on to it? And then we come to James chapter 1, which was read for us this morning. I have it up on screen. I typed it out just so we could read it, but it's already been read for us. But it's a wonderful passage. James is a very wonderful book in general. If you need a book to study, I'd encourage you to study to the best of your ability the book of James. It is straightforward. He is very to the point throughout the letter. Paul is a little bit longer. Some of the topics he covers are a little bit harder to grasp. But when it comes to James, things just come a little bit more naturally. And we see in the text for today, he already starts doing that. And it's a really good thing that he is such a straightforward author, because right away, he is going to help the Jewish Christians of the time and help us to figure out how to hold on to joy. In the very first verse, we see a few things that I need us to understand, particularly about who James is writing to. I mentioned a moment ago, yes, it's Jewish Christians, but we see that specifically from verse 1. We see to the 12 tribes. So we understand from that it's to Jewish Christians, which are scattered abroad outside of Palestine. These people are these Jewish Christians who were once Jews who converted to Christianity. Well, who knows through what means, we're not told, but we just knew that these are people who were once part of the Jewish community who has since then decided, I'm going to obey the gospel. I'm going to follow Jesus Christ. I'm going to proclaim him. I'm going to confess him. He is going to be the one that I try to live my life for. And when we look at James, and if you would, I'm not going to have the text up on screen the entire time, so if you want to turn there, we can study out of it together. as we see in the first verse, we see who it's written to. But shortly after, we see a little bit of a problem arise. We'll get to that in a second. Why do we need to establish who the recipients are? Well, it's because of the context. We need context to better understand the past, to better understand what we are reading. And if we do that, we can then proceed to have a good application for us today. The Bible and everything written that we see, a lot of that, some of it might be history, especially the New Testament. When we look at the New Testament, it is history for us. But the Pauline letters, the gospel accounts, the book of Acts, it had a specific audience. There were people who were going to read that for some benefit, to help them. For instance, we know the Corinthian letters are to the church at Corinth, to help them with their problems. We need to understand who it's written to so we can understand why they are being written to. If we don't, we're going to mishandle the text and we might misapply it. It's important for us to have the context. Now we move into the next chunk of verses 2 through 4. And as we look through these verses, we immediately see, my brethren, count all joy when you fall into various trials. James' very first topic to these Jewish Christians who are scattered is a very big challenge for them. They need to count all joy when they fall into various trials. And of course, we hear this and we see this, and a question is, why begin like this? Why does James feel the need to start his letter addressing these Jewish Christians by, you need to count all joy when you fall into various trials? Consider what it means to be a Jewish Christian in this time. It means you lost your Jewish community. A lot of the Jews hated Jesus Christ. It's not just a dislike either. They despised him. We see it in the Gospels. We see how he was crucified by the Jews. This was something that Peter brought up in Acts chapter 2. And he essentially said to them, you're the ones who crucified him. Now, of course, we can be happy and grateful knowing that a lot of those people at that time in Acts chapter 2 recognized what they had done. They converted, they made the right decision, but not everyone did. A lot of these people still hated Jesus even after his death, even past however long it may have been. So to be a Jewish Christian means you're leaving behind your Jewish community. They weren't going to like you as much anymore. They weren't going to support you. And not only that, they were going to persecute you. Being a Jewish Christian meant being persecuted by the Jewish community as well. Maybe not all the time, but surely you were. To be a Jewish Christian meant that you're leaving behind what the other Jews thought was truly what God wanted. You were leaving behind God's chosen people. Whoops. You were leaving behind God's chosen people to follow this blasphemer named Jesus Christ. How could you leave behind your family, your friends? How could you leave us behind to follow after that crazy man? How could you leave us behind? How could you abandon God? Imagine if those were the things said to you. And I don't know, maybe some of us who have become Christians have had to face that kind of language. Maybe not in that exact way, but maybe we've had family who's asked why we've abandoned them or abandoned the church that we were at before. Being a Jewish Christian meant you lost your Jewish community. You lost access to that, but you also lost them in a way that they're going to persecute you because of what you decided. Why count it all joy? With these trials likely plaguing the Jewish Christians of the time, we can see maybe why he asked this question now. But why did they need to count all joy when they fell into these various trials? Well, in verse 3, James writes, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. we see a beginning of a process that James lays out for these Jewish Christians. First of all, they're to count all joy because they know that this will result in patience. They know that even though everything is going wrong, even though things are not going well for them, there's going to be something that comes out of this. There's going to be something good that comes out of this for them. And it's going to hopefully help them. These trials will produce in them patience and thus help them to grow closer to God because of that. In Romans 5:4, Paul kind of expands upon this a little bit more. Not directly tied to James, of course. It's a different letter to different people. But in the verse before and verse 4, it echoes a lot of this same idea. In Romans 5:4, the essence boils down to this, that perseverance, which is the same word for patience, just slightly differently worded, then produces character. And Paul says that character produces hope, which he expands upon is knowing that God's going to keep his promises. They can count all joy because these trials produce patience. And if we connect it with Romans 5:4, we understand that that patience leads to so many other wonderful things for Christians. Eventually we move on to James 1:4, and we see that he writes, "But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." They need to let patience have its perfect, or another way of looking at it, its complete work. It needs to be fully realized. They are to let patience work in them and continue working in them as much as they can, not just a one-time thing, but over the course of their lives as they go through trials, to help build them up, to have this perfect or complete work, to fully work in them. And it's going to transform them into one who is perfect and complete. The perfect work of patience is the hope Christians have in God, having reached the end faithfully and being made whole. The result of all this is that then a Christian is going to lack nothing. I want to bring out the ideas of being perfect and complete because it's important. Being perfect means to have reached the end. And complete means being made whole. Hence why what is written up there is written. We see this process. These trials are there. And they can count it all joy because they know that these trials are going to produce in them a perseverance or patience. And ultimately, when that finally has its complete work, when it continues to work on their character and hope, which they didn't read, but we can make a connection, that those are things that are going to result from this patience working in them, it is going to ultimately end up with one who is perfect and complete, and they will lack nothing. There's going to be nothing else that they need. This is looking forward to the end, not the end of the trial, but to the end of a Christian's life. He is telling them, look forward to the end of the Christian life and know that this trial will result in you lacking nothing when that time comes. Why count it all joy? Because it's going to produce ultimately something more wonderful than anything this world will throw at you. Eventually, James moves on to a section largely about wisdom. He begins in verse 5 saying, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him." He now moves on talking about God's wisdom. And the Jewish Christians that he is talking to, that he is trying to help through these difficult times, are told to ask if they lack it. Now we might ask, why would James move on to this when he's just talking about trials? Is he done already? He's not quite done. Human wisdom is never enough. In any time period and in any culture, our own wisdom is going to fail us. And this is especially true when you're in trials. Think about how the Jewish Christians might have acted if they didn't ask for wisdom from God. They only tried to rely on their own wisdom. Their own wisdom when being estranged and persecuted by their Jewish community might have been, let's go back to that community. We're being persecuted. Let's just go back because this is not worth it. Their wisdom might be, what if we retaliate? Their wisdom might have been, what if we do X, Y, or Z to get out of this? And that wisdom is just not enough for them. That wisdom is not going to help them. It's just going to hurt more. Their human wisdom is faulty. It's not going to be enough. God's wisdom is always needed in the life of a Christian. Frankly, it's needed in the life of everyone. And so, especially in trials, they are told to seek after God's wisdom, to reach out to him. They're told that he is going to give freely without reproach. He's not going to revile anyone. He's not going to scoff at them. He's not going to say, I don't want you to have wisdom, but this person over here can have wisdom. He is not going to go ahead and say, okay, you can have wisdom, but I'm going to demand a little bit of something in exchange. You have to give an extra $10 this next Sunday. You need to do 20% more service than you've done previously. I'm going to require you to go out and preach to 1,000 people in this next week. He's not going to do that. James is trying to get them to understand God's not going to say, I'm not going to give you this wisdom, or I'm going to give it with something in return. God's going to give freely. He's not going to demand anything from us. Now, of course, Jewish Christians should understand at this point, they still have responsibilities to God. If they want to be Christian, they have to obey God. They have to do their best to serve him. They have to do their best to follow his commands. That's a natural part even for us today. But God's not going to add anything extra just because they ask him for wisdom. What he wants, he wants. All he expects from them and from us is for us to serve him. And the wisdom is just something that he wants to give us. God's wisdom does a wonderful thing. It helps the recipients to endure trials and to develop the perspective that James presents in the previous verses. To help them further develop the idea that, yes, these trials are awful, but it's going to produce something greater for me in the future. God's wisdom is going to help the Jewish Christians to be able to better have that mindset, to better be able to strive for that end result. God's wisdom isn't going to get them out, but it will help them to endure. Now, James does present conditions for obtaining wisdom. There were two of them. Two conditions he presents. We've already seen one of them. The first one is that one has to approach God. We see this in verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God. God's not just going to give it because you need it. He wants you to approach him first before he's going to give that to them. So the first requirement that the Jewish Christians are told, you need to first go to God and ask him for the wisdom. Let him ask of God. The second requirement is the one that one has to ask in faith. Verse 6, but let him ask in faith with no doubting. What follows after is a very long comparison of those who do doubt. People need to ask in faith. There doesn't need to be doubt there. The doubt's just going to get in the way. Faith, this isn't a definition of it, but this is essentially what is going to be equated to it. If one has faith, it means that that person believes that God can and will give wisdom. It means that they believe that they're going to approach God, that they're going to fulfill that first requirement, that they're going to approach him, and that he is actually going to give them that wisdom. He is going to give them the help that they need. And when that happens, you've met both requirements, and you'll have that wisdom. But if you don't have faith, if you have that doubt, it reveals uncertainty towards God. It reveals maybe that person doesn't truly believe that God will give that wisdom. And so this second requirement is perhaps more important than the first one. Because you can go to God as much as you want, but the Jewish Christians are told if you don't have that faith, it's not going to be good for you. They are told that one who doubts is compared to a sea wave blown by the wind. And ultimately, they're unstable in everything. They're going to be unstable in faith. They'll have not a really good foundation for it. They won't have a good foundation for their life. If you think about a sea wave, if that wind blows, it's going to be over here one moment, that's going to be over there the next moment, that's going to be behind them the next moment, and that way just doesn't have any solid foundation. We also hear the phrase, go wherever the wind takes us. And that's kind of the same idea here. Not having a firm foundation, but just going back and forth based on what's going on. He compares those who doubt to that sea wave and calls them unstable. Doubt results in one missing out on the wisdom that God can provide. And so he warns them, you need to have faith. Make sure you have faith, because if you have faith, you'll have that wisdom. But if you don't have that faith, you are missing out on so many wonderful things. When we go through these 8 verses, understanding how it applies to these Jewish Christians in this time, a warning for them to ask God for wisdom and faith, helping them to have this mindset of, I'm going to endure these trials because of what will be produced in it. Now that we've gone through that, we can fully apply what we've read to ourselves. To have joy in trials. When we're going through the difficult times in our life, when we find it hard to have that joy, whether it's because of a loss of a job or hardship with family, or because of a death in family or an illness or money struggles or whatever else it may be, when we have found ourselves in a place where we don't have joy, yet want to have it, when we ask ourselves, how do I have joy in this moment? We can look to James and we can apply these 3 things. First, to have joy in trials, we must focus on the fruits that will be produced from it. James presents this process. The trial is going to produce patience. And that patience ultimately leads to a hope of a better life. When we tie in Romans 5:4, we get this full picture for ourselves. The Jewish Christians may not have had Romans at that time, or may not have been able to read it. We have the blessing that we're able to connect these things together. But even then, their message doesn't change. Their message still says, understand what's happening now, understand how it will help you in the future, and understand how it's going to get you to heaven. Trials lead to patience. We have to make sure we're letting this patience work in us. We have to make sure that we have this mind about us that, yes, this is hard for us, but I need to be patient in this time. Because this patience will reward me with a better life, not only in this life, but in the one to come. Focusing on struggles is going to gain us nothing. If we simply have struggles in our focus, if we are only looking at the struggles that are happening, we're going to miss out on so many more great things that could be happening around us. We can focus on a lot of things, but if we are laser focused on one, a lot of times we get to miss out on other things that help. If we're laser focused on the struggles, we're going to miss that patience that will help us to get to heaven, that will help us to prepare ourselves in this life to get to that point. Focusing on what comes next grants hope. It prepares us to enter into that better life where we're going to lack nothing. Imagine that. A life where we do not have a single thing that we need anymore. A place where we have nothing withheld from us. We have the joy that we are there with God for eternity. And that is the joy we get to look forward to. And at that point, we're not going to have anything else we want. We will have all that we need. And it's a beautiful thing to know that there's a point in our lives where we can say we will lack nothing anymore. The second thing we have to consider, to have joy in trials, not only do we have to focus on the fruits that will be produced, we also have to focus on the wisdom that comes from God. That wisdom is important for us. Now, this wisdom is not magical understanding. This wisdom isn't going to just come to us and say, aha, I know exactly what I need to do right now. It is not going to be a mystical knowledge. It is not going to be a hidden knowledge like Gnosticism might have us to believe. It is not going to immediately come to us necessarily, and it's not going to be magical in helping us to understand how we can escape this trial. Because admittedly, there are trials in life that we have to go through. If we don't have trials in life, we can't end up going through the process James presents. God's wisdom is not an escape mechanism for us, but is instead a way for us to help, is his way of helping us to endure the hardships and looking forward to his promises that he gives us. If we want to have joy in trials, we need to focus on this wisdom, because our own wisdom, like we mentioned before, is not going to get us anywhere in this life. We might say, I've lost my job, I'm having money troubles because of it. I'm going to try to rely on my own wisdom, and how far is that going to get us? One thing's for certain, it's not going to help us to have that patience. We need to ask God for wisdom, because if we have wisdom from him, it will be a benefit to us. Something I want us to consider is God is not a wisdom vending machine for us to just get something from whenever we need it. We need to make sure that we are remaining faithful to him, and that's where we come to our third point. To have joy in trials, we must focus on our own walk with God. We can't just go up to God and punch a couple buttons like a vending machine and say, I want some wisdom today, please. If we go up to him and just treat him like that, then what does that show about our faith? If we go to God only when it benefits us, what does that say about our faith? Faith needs to look like us constantly walking with him, constantly going to him, constantly striving to do the best that we can in this life so we can prove that we want to be with him in the next. God's not going to bring us into heaven when we've proved on this earth that we don't want to walk with him now. If we want to get to heaven, we have to walk with him now. If we want wisdom from him, if we want to have that process James describes, this is the core. The core of all that James says is focusing on our walk with God. If we don't have this, all the rest of this means nothing. It is the essence of what we need to do. It's the only way to obtain wisdom. It's the only way to have that patience work in us. It's the only way to be able to get through those trials effectively while being able to look forward to a better life at the end. So what should a faithful walk look like? If I wanted to explain this in its entirety, we would be here for probably years. And we'd be learning from each other a great deal, I imagine. But I want to at least cover a couple things that I thought about. If we want to have a faithful walk, it needs to look like us leaving behind the world and the old man and living for Christ. Matthew 16:24-25, we probably famously know this passage from Jesus' words, take up your cross and follow me. But he does say that we need to leave behind the world. We need to leave behind everything that it wants to give us. We need to drop that and pick up something that is going to be hard to carry and something that we need to carry for the rest of our lives. But if we want to be faithful, we need to choose to pick up that cross. And we need to choose Jesus over everything the world provides and everything our old self wanted to do. A faithful walk also needs to look like constantly going to God in prayer. 1 Thessalonians 5:17 is very simple. Pray without ceasing. It doesn't mean that we're going to spend every single moment in prayer. Otherwise, we might be sinning right now because we're not constantly in prayer. What it does mean, though, is that we are going to be a prayerful people. It means that we are going to pray to God when things are going well. It means we're going to pray to God when things aren't going well. We're going to pray to God because we are so happy that we have new people who are part of the Lord's church. It means that we're going to pray to Him, to ask Him to help us to bring others to the church. It's us asking Him to help those who have fallen away to come back to Him. It's asking Him for wisdom. It's asking Him to bless us more. It's us asking Him to help us to recognize those blessings. It's constantly communicating with Him. God wants us to communicate with Him. Otherwise, He wouldn't have given us this avenue to be able to communicate. Not to mention, if we're not a prayerful people, how can we ask Him for that wisdom in the first place? But a faithful life needs to not only look like leaving behind the world and living for Christ, it also looks like constantly going to God in prayer. And third and finally for this, it means striving to better know God and His commands. John 14:15, if you love me, keep my commandments. If we truly love Jesus, we will follow what He says. And if we want to follow what He says, the only way for us to actually know is to read this. Everything I am saying today, if it is not scriptural, it needs to be tossed out. You cannot necessarily take what I have to say and use it as doctrine. The only place for doctrine, the only place for how to live as a Christian, it doesn't come from me, it doesn't come from any preacher or any man, it comes from God. And so, if we want to properly be a Christian, the Bible is going to be how we properly know how to follow God. It is going to be the way that we know how we can get to heaven. And so if we want to be faithful, we need to constantly be spending time in this and know what it says. Is God your focus? If we were to boil down the sermon, this would probably be the question we can boil it down to. We need to have so many things as our focus if we want to have joy in trials. But ultimately, we have to ask ourselves, is God my focus in this life? Because if He's not the focus, then our efforts at trying to have joy are not going to be fruitful. At least not fruitful for us trying to get to heaven. We need to have God as our focus. If God hasn't been your focus, perhaps for your life, maybe you haven't become a Christian yet and haven't decided to make God your focus. We would urge you to make that decision today, to make that decision now to make Him your focus. But if you are not ready for that yet, if you haven't heard the good news about Jesus Christ, that's the first step. Because we can't baptize you, you can't be added to the Lord's church unless you know what He's done for you. It's the basic understanding. We need to understand what Jesus did for us. We need to hear the good news that Jesus lived on this earth as the perfect man, that He did nothing wrong. He served a sinful people while He was alive, and in the greatest act of service ever to exist, He died on the cross so that our sins could be forgiven. If you don't understand that, then we would urge you to study. Because we want to help you to get to the point where you can say, I know what Jesus did for me. I have this understanding. And because I have this understanding, because I've heard the word, because I believe in Jesus as the Son of God, because I, now knowing what sin is and how it goes against God, have repented of it, I now will confess Jesus, and now I will be baptized for remission of my sins. It's a process. If God isn't your focus, if you haven't been baptized, we would urge you to either take the steps to be baptized and actively confessing and being baptized today, or to study with someone here to get ready for that. If you're already a Christian, God hasn't been your focus, and there are things you need to repent of, and you need to make things right in your life, we would urge you to make things right. And we would love to pray for you and help you in any way that we can. If there's any need today, if you would come to the front as we stand and as we sing.